Well, welcome everybody and happy Monday. We want to go ahead and get started. I'm Vernon Wall, he, him pronouns, Director of Business Development for LeaderShape. And we are just excited to be back again with another week of virtual conversations. And I want to start off, well, first of all, we'll see how my computer works. Oh, there we go. I think we're at a point now where I totally know that we've all been on Zoom way too much. And it's always important for us to take a moment to say, we will be using this platform, depending on how many people are here, our guest moderator will facilitate this wonderful conversation. But definitely, we found that the chat has been a place where people just really and truly just engage each other, share resources, respond to the facilitator's comments. This is more of a conversation. I always say it's sort of like a virtual podcast in a way, to really just engage each other. And also too, we'll do some polls, and also too, if you want to send some questions, you can definitely do that. I will try my best to keep up with them. And yeah. So we're just excited that you're here. We, depending on the number of people, we may ask you to unmute if you feel like you want to share some things, but definitely, we want to give our facilitator an opportunity to have some great conversations. So that's why we ask that you stay muted and use the private chat. However, as we move forward, as you all know, we may shift and change that. So thank you for being here. I do want to begin with our land acknowledgement, and recognizing the fact that, I always tell people that for me, I don't want a land acknowledgement to be sort of a checkbox. I do want you to know that when you see a land acknowledgement, it really is about three things. It's about, number one, honoring Native and Indigenous people in the land that we are currently in. And I know we're zooming in from all over. So give a moment to think about those tribal nations that are in your communities. For me, I'm coming to you from Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C., the ancestral homeland of many Native and Indigenous tribes, but primarily the Piscataway and the Anacostic. The second land acknowledgement is about thinking of your own ancestry, the people who came before you, the shoulders that you stand on, and connecting with Native and Indigenous folks. So it's about those two things. And then the third is, in my mind, about how can we decolonize higher education? What does it look like to decolonize our work, to make our work more equitable? And so anytime you see a land acknowledgement, I do want you to reflect on those three things. Thank you very much. For those of you that don't know us and LeaderShape, we are a not-for-profit that really looks at what does it mean if the world, if everyone led with integrity. And our vision is a just, caring, and thriving world where all lead with integrity and a healthy disregard for the impossible. Our mission is to transform the world by increasing the number of people who lead with integrity and a healthy disregard for the impossible. There are so many definitions around leadership and about leadership. At LeaderShape, we believe that leadership involves living in a state of possibility, making a commitment to a vision, developing relationships to move that vision into action, and sustaining a high level of integrity. Effective leadership takes place in the context of a community and results in a more equitable society. I'm so happy to have the phenomenal Dr. Jeanine Ward-Roof with us, who is a member of the LeaderShape community, and really to talk about compassion fatigue, recognition and renewal. So Janine, say hello and tell people all about you.
Well, thank you. And Vernon, thank you so much for being host today. You make all this so easy, and for LeaderShape for allowing me to have the conversation with everyone. So it's great to see the faces of people that I know. It's fun to see what you're doing. I can't wait to catch up with you. And hopefully if we don't do that here, we'll connect afterwards. But I am Jeanine Ward-Roof, as Vernon said, and I serve as the Vice President for Student Affairs at Ferris State University in Michigan, and have been here for 8 years. Prior to this role, I worked at Florida State in Florida, and then Clemson University in South Carolina, and University of Findlay in Ohio, in a myriad of roles, primarily in the student activities, student orientation, new student enrollment, first year programs kind of areas. I am thrilled to have been a part of the LeaderShape community for a long period of time. I started out as a program coordinator for the Institute. Then I was able to be a co-lead, and actually I see someone on here, Rachel, where I got to go to Qatar and co-host, or not co-host, pardon me, co-facilitated a program there, which was phenomenal. I think I learned more than the students did in that particular context. And now I'm also a board member, so thrilled to have that role, and encourage you, if you're interested in LeaderShape, to please raise your hand. There is so much work to do, and we do such good work that we love people who are excited about doing the nonprofit work and helping people realize that we can get where we want to go, and there's so much that we can do. We can make the world a better place if we just do it together. So in my life, let's see, I have an incredible partner, a husband, and we'll have been married 25 years this year. That's a long time. And a sweet daughter who makes my life just more fun each and every day. And then lots of animals that come in and out of our lives as we live them. But right now we have 2 dogs and 4 chickens. So you never really know what's going to happen at our house. And I'm excited to be here today. And I do use she, her pronouns.
Thanks, Janine. We're excited to have you. Just want to let folks know, feel free to, in the chat, introduce yourself to each other and say where you're from, and whatever you want to say, because we want this to be a robust conversation to with all of us. So welcome. All right, so we got a couple of polling questions for you. So let's see if Vernon can do this. I have faith in me.
I know you can do it.
Zoom has not been my friend today for some reason, but we'll see. All right, the very first poll is: rate your priority for your own self-care. Got some things coming in. I love how people are going medium. It's like we don't want to say, good number of people saying hi though. I mean, good deal. I think everybody's in. All right, so that's our first one. Janine, any thoughts around that first question?
Well, my question to you, once you answered it, then how do you manifest that? So even though it's priority, do you actually make it a priority in your life? And what does that look like? So we all talk about the importance of it, but how do we do that? And that's pretty common. I love that there's no non-existent. So kudos to you all. And having the high, that's fantastic. We need to all learn from you. And medium probably depends on the work that you're doing and the week that you're having and what's happening in your lives. And then low, I put myself in that area too. So I have a lot to learn. So I'm excited to always hear what people do. And we'll get to that some at the end. What are the things that work well and how do you manage that?
Great, cool. All right, let's see if I can get the second one. Question number 2. Rate your support of others' self-care. Coming in very nicely here. All right, let me share some results. And I think, Janine, when you see these, you will not be surprised with this result. Exactly what I thought it would be. And boom, boom.
Yeah, we always rate each other higher than us. I know. I do that too. We just are so compassionate about what we do, and we'll talk about that and how we get into some situations because of that. But it doesn't surprise me. Is anybody surprised by these? Or I see lots of head shaking, no.
Yeah, I think about the fact that I sometimes catch myself sharing things around self-care to others and not really recognizing the fact that I'm not doing what I'm saying. Like people, I'll give people some advice or some support and go, I kind of need to listen to myself sometimes, you know?
Why don't I do those things? Yeah, absolutely. And I agree. And you know, when you think, okay, why are we talking about self-care when we're talking about compassion fatigue? But when I think about the kind of conversation or dialogue we're going to have today is, so ultimately, to me, the connection between self-care and compassion fatigue is one of those that we have to focus on, because that's the prevention part. I think that's where we can make a difference if we're able to figure that out. And it's not going to be 100% every day, but can we do it more than not do it? I think that makes a big difference for people. And we see that for those of you who are supervising individuals right now, you see this massive exodus in the work that we're doing. And, you know, it's really important work. And so how do we keep people connected and how can we help them stay healthy? So all of this, I think, is so important. And we've heard this. It's nothing new. We've heard this since day one, I think, of our lives, but we don't do it well.
Yeah. So Janine, I'm going to let you just keep going.
Okay. All right. So I pulled up, I put a few slides together just to give some common vocabulary. And there is a lot out there on compassion fatigue. And the great thing about it is because it really the origins are in the medical field, so much of it is free. And so you can go out and find inventories and dialogues and definitions and all of that. So I've given you a whole bunch of resources in this particular set of slides, but there's a lot more out there too. But Charles Figley from Tulane University is a leading researcher on this topic. And he's written many books and presented throughout the world about compassion fatigue. His research is prevalent, and he also is very generous with the findings and suggested solutions. So again, you can go out there and find all kinds of data. And I first found this topic when I was serving as the Dean of Students at Florida State. And to give you some context, it's 40,000 students in the capital of Florida, just lots and lots of crisis. It's just that when you have that many people together, there's that many things happening. And I saw my staff and I kind of saying, gosh, this is difficult work. And how do we do this? And so I started collaborating with a colleague, and many of you may know her, who's a faculty member there, Dr. Kathy Guthrie. And we conducted research on this topic and specifically connected it to student affairs work. So we looked at compassion fatigue and how that manifested in student affairs work. And then after we got those results, I worked with another colleague in the employee assistance program, and we presented about the topic across campus as a way to educate and mitigate. And we thought this is where you start, right? You start at your own home, and then you figure out how to make ripples. And I do want to say I am not an expert. I put this in very large text in there. I'm not an expert on this topic, but I do see ways that we can incorporate all of this prevention of compassion fatigue into our work and into our student affairs work. So that's kind of the context of where it started and how I got engaged. And if you flip to the next slide, so here's a definition. Like I said, Charles Figley has written lots and lots out there, but these were two parts of definitions that I thought really made sense. And Figley defines compassion fatigue as secondary traumatic stress reaction that results in a reduced capacity to bear the suffering of others. Or the way I explain it, it's sometimes you're so overwhelmed by the trauma that you're managing, either from an incident or a group of people or things that are happening in your work, that it leads you to begin to gloss over its effect on others. And that's a dangerous place to be in our work, right? Because we've got students that things are happening in their lives, and it's the first time it's happened to them, but it's not the first time you've managed it. And so that to me was a little bit of a wake-up call to say, wow, we have to. It's kind of like those times in orientation when you encourage your student leaders to say, don't forget that the first time you hear that question will be the first time that person asked it, but not the first time you hear that day. So it's just reminding people that you're hearing these things much more often, or you're dealing with them much more often. So if you go to the next slide, we'll look a little deeper. So there's another researcher, Dr. Beth Hadnell-Stamm, and she's now retired, but she has done a lot of research on the topic of professional quality of life. And based on her research, she created this tool where this tool was created. It's called the Professional Quality of Life, or ProQual. And so this is a little diagram that they have, and this is an incredible resource. And they actually have created an entire PowerPoint or a entire set of slides that you can use. They let you just take them and use them in your own presentations about this protocol because they're so committed to having people do this work. And what it does is it enables people to explore the two components that she described as segments of one's professional quality of life. So that's compassion satisfaction, which is all the positive aspects of working as someone who helps others. So all those exciting things that draw you to the work that you're doing. And then compassion fatigue, which is the negative aspects of doing the same work. And so some additional aspects of that compassion fatigue are the actual burnout, which we've all heard about burnout for years. And then also, and she defined that as really the inefficiency or feelings of overwhelmness or just having difficulty kind of getting through the work. And then the work-related traumatic stress and primary and secondary stress, which she defined as those elements of compassion fatigue that are at the other end, at the high end, that they define direct targets or direct, if you think about it like an event or exposure to an event due to a relationship with the primary person. So you're either directly involved or you're involved through a secondary person, and then you end up with that trauma as well. So if you put that in the context of our work, if you have balance on both of those sides, you can probably manage fairly well. If you're tipped toward the compassion fatigue area where it's a lot of overwhelming pieces and you don't have as much of the satisfaction, it gets way more overwhelming. And I'll give you one other example. I'm in this incredible professional development opportunity where I'm talking with a lot of presidents about their work. And one of them, I asked, how do you do this every day? How do you manage the type of things that come across your desk? And what this person said to me is, you have to have enough of the good stuff to outweigh the bad stuff. And when I thought about it, I was like, isn't that what we all wish for, right? This professional quality of life. We want more of the good stuff and less of the bad stuff. So then the part is, we have some control over that. Not all of it, but we have some control. So how do we then make sure that when we do get the bad stuff, we can put it in context and manage it? So if you flip to the next slide. So there's a lot. I've given you a lot of really very kind of basic information about a really deep topic. And like I said, this is the origins are from the medical field. But when we really stopped and Dr. Guthrie and I thought about it, we thought, there's a lot of connections to what we do in higher education as well. And when we surveyed those student affairs professionals about compassion fatigue, we found a lot of parallels. And what we realized is many people define their journey into student affairs as a type of calling. It's something they want to get involved in because they want to help each other or they want to help others. They see this as a transformational type of work. Maybe they were transformed by higher education or they've seen other students be transformed. And so they want to interact with people who want to make a difference. And so it's a lot of heart work, right? It's a lot of heart. We say in LeaderShape, a lot of heart and head work. And it's the same thing. You're still doing this heart and head work. So that's the norm. Now overlay the past 2 years, right? This pandemic, and then all of the roles that we in student affairs picked up. We're not the only ones, but things like setting up testing and vaccination clinics. How about running isolation and quarantine spaces? How about setting up systems to mitigate COVID? And we see that there are more and more and more opportunities above the common threshold of work for the development of this compassion fatigue. So our work in higher education is transformational. I don't know about you, but on my campus, I see students transformed every day and the things that they're able to accomplish. I'm so excited to be on that journey with them. And it's rewarding, it's exciting, but it's exhausting. And so you have to manage it. So what do we do? What's next? How do we manage this? So the first step is you have to identify it. So the question we have to ask in student affairs is, are we managing burnout or are we managing compassion fatigue? And what's that difference? What's the trauma? What's the pieces we're trying to manage? So even before the pandemic, we were managing a lot of traumatic student issues. They landed in student affairs. They're helping students with their life. I mean, life is tough. And there's some students who have a lot that they're managing, as well as our colleagues and sometimes us as well. And so we have to figure out how can we help that student from the moment they're in it all the way up to what they want to do next, and then what they do next. And sometimes that's minute by minute. Sometimes it's hour by hour. Sometimes it's day by day. Sometimes you have parents to help. Sometimes you have other family members, but all of that is a lot. And we're holding that. And I will share this other story too. I have two brothers, and they both work in fields where when they go home at night, they don't take their work with them, is what they say. One is a paramedic, so he definitely has images and things that he's managing, but he can do nothing. Once he walks out of the ambulance, he can't do anything. My other brother works for United Airlines, and he, I don't know if I can say that. Can we use them as a sponsor now, Vernon? Can we go back to them and say, we'll give you free advertising?
Yeah, I'm a Delta person, sorry. Go ahead, keep going.
I am too, don't tell him. But he, when he goes home, he didn't have anything. I mean, there's nothing of his work. And so we always talk about how our work is so different, because I go home and I think about the student and what's going on. And sometimes you have to go back and deal with other things and help. So our work is just very, very different. And so you could have the potential to really get kind of sucked into some vortexes very easily because you care. So, then what do we do? Where do we go from here? So if you flip to the next slide, these are some of those free resources out there. And these are just links you can get on there. Green Cross is a particular entity that has lots and lots and lots of resources. This is one in particular. It's about traumatology standards and self-care guidelines. Really simple kind of things, but it really makes you think about what do I do? How do I do this? Checking your basic needs at work checklist. Again, another resource. It's a quick, these are all quick things you can do in a few minutes, but it gives you that that minute to say, oh, wait a minute, I'm a little off kilter today. I got to do something different. I liken these two, because we're coming out of the pandemic, or wherever we are with the pandemic, we're still managing it. But as we come out of things that we had to do, everybody did those symptom checkers every day for a long period of time. And you just had to sit for a minute and say, how do I feel today? These are those kind of things, but they're with a more global perspective of this kind of where you are, your compassion fatigue, how you're managing all that. There's another one about compassion, success, and fatigue, self-help for helpers. So it's specifically looking at some of those skills. And then that ProQual instrument is one you can go through. It's really easy, where you can get some idea of where are you? What kind of, how do you rate your day? How do you rate how you're doing, how you're managing all of these pieces? So lots of resources.
Yeah, well, and I was going to say, just so folks know, we are recording this, so you'll get a link to the recording, so you'll have this as a resource. And these are outstanding resources. I got to tell you, Jeanine, I love this concept of compassion success.
Yes, I do. Yeah.
Because it really does, when we move into these conversations, we move into sort of a deficit model conversation. And I love the fact that you're talking about compassion success and compassion fatigue at the same time. So what does it look like?
Right. And thanks, Vernon. It is that balance, right? It's every day is about balance. And some days you're like this, and sometimes you're like this. Right. But you can, you rely on your friends. And that's, for some days when it's really bad, you have to go home. Like you have to go and do some things out of the office. That's why we have vacation. That's why I have sick day. So using those things to take care of ourselves. I don't want to compare everything to the pandemic, but it makes you reflect. And one of the things I've realized as we were having conversations on our campus about what does this mean? Where do we go from here? And one of the things that I realized is what the pandemic has made us all do, now whether or not we keep doing this, is that going to work sick is no longer a badge of honor. Because, you used to come in and you're like dragging yourself in the car and you got things coming out of all kinds of places and you're like, I'm here, I'm ready to do my work. And you're like, no, you don't need to, like, you should go home, And I think COVID made us stop and say, you know what, you really should stay home. Like, that's why you have sick days. It's okay to take care of yourself. So you have to stop and figure that out along the way. So if you,
I think it's sometimes difficult too with those of us in student affairs, because many of us live and work student affairs. Right. And so we almost feel sometimes defeated if we don't show up when we're sick. And I'm like, no, where did that narrative come from that I can't take a day off? I mean, my mother is probably the greatest philosopher, because she would tell me I would be at home sitting and doing some work or getting ready for a presentation, and she will come in and she'll go, Brennan, you do realize that race sensitive will be around tomorrow, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm like, oh yeah, I do believe that I'm contributing to making the world better. And
Mhm.
if I take a nap, it'll be okay. It will be okay.
Well, you're right. And it's just a matter of allowing yourself that self-care, right? To stay home.
Mhm,
If you stayed home one day, you probably would be able to manage the next 5. But if you go
mhm.
in, it's going to take you a week and a half to get over. And you're going to be just exhausted at the end of every day. And our work's hard now. I mean, it's great work, but it's hard work and it takes a lot of energy. And so having that energy, being at your best every day is phenomenal. And I have to share, for the holidays, I got a Mary Englebright calendar, and the calendar piece today, it's a quote by Norman Vincent Peale, and it says, "Learn to relax. Your body is precious as it houses your mind and spirit. Inner peace begins with a relaxed body." And I thought, what a great thing for today.
Mhm.
It like fit on. I was like, this is exactly what we're supposed to be doing, is taking care of ourselves. And if you were whatever way you grew up and however you define your family, somebody in that unit probably said to you that if you don't take care of yourself, you can't take care of anybody else.
Yeah.
And even when we fly, when we get on an airplane, what's the thing they say about the masks that come down, right? Put your own mask on first,
Yep.
that you have to put yours on before you can help anybody else. And so it's really thinking about that. How do you do that every day at work? Like, how do you take care of yourself? What do you need to do to go and rejuvenate? Do you need to go to the gym in the middle of the day? Do you need to take a walk? Do you need to sit by yourself and eat lunch? Do you need to be in a big group to eat lunch? Do you need to come in at 10 o'clock instead of 8 o'clock because you were there till 11 o'clock the night before on campus all weekend, or whatever's going on? Just trying to figure that out. And I dare say right now, we probably have one of the most flexible spaces in higher ed than we've ever had before, because we actually changed things. Like, we changed academic calendars. We didn't do that ever.
Mhm.
We put things in and took things out, and now we have this whole work from home. We can actually work from home a little bit. Maybe not the whole time, but we're getting there. So I think we have more flexibility in that place. So take advantage of whatever that is on your campus for you, to make sure you can bring your best self when you do your work.
You got me thinking about, I just actually chatted this morning with when you go to conferences, you run into new professionals, and I always tell them, if you want to, reach out to me and have a conversation, let's do it. And one did, brand new professional, we chatted, and one of the things I mentioned to her was around quality of life. And I said, if you ever have a mentor to tell you that you can live anywhere for 2 years, run away. Because that is one of the worst things I think we can tell a new professional, is that, oh, it doesn't matter about your quality of life. You can be anywhere because it's a position that you want. I'm like, no, quality of life is important.
Right.
And you can absolutely find a place to be where you can advance and also have a great quality of life. So that whole thing around, go for the job, don't worry about where it is. I'm like, especially for people in historically marginalized identities, absolutely not. Absolutely not. Not said don't ever, and well-meaning professionals have said that to young professionals. And so I'm like, no. This self-care piece and the compassion success is important.
Right. I agree, Vernon. I think the other piece that we have as misnomers is, oh, I can be there till that person leaves. For my supervisor, a coworker, and you're like, oh, you spend so much time at work in some capacity that you're not going to like everybody you work with, and to where you're going to be best friends with them. But to be able to manage that, and I keep saying the word manage, but to be able to manage that process and feel like you can go in and you feel valued is so important, and particularly in a young professional's life. But really, even as a vice president, I want to come in and feel like I matter, and make sure that we set up systems where others matter too. So it's a lot of, it's that heart and head piece too. You probably could go live somewhere for 2 years, but what would your life be for those 2 years? And is that what you want? I mean, God golly, you have lots and lots of choices. But I think, I'll say one more thing about that too. I think as new professionals too, you think, oh my gosh, if I don't take this job, I'll never have another offer. And that's just so not true. I mean, you're going to have lots of offers and lots of choices. So you don't have to take the first one. But it is hard when you don't have a job, or that yours is ending and you have to find a new one. Absolutely. So one of the things that LeaderShape asked us to do is to say what are some guiding questions? How do we even begin to think about this in our career? And so I appreciate the ability to kind of put these on paper. And so the first thing I'd ask in your environment is self-care important in student affairs? So is it important for you? And then is it important in student affairs? And then we'll get to this in a second, but then how is it in your workplace? Like, where can you see the illustrations of it? So that's an important piece. And then the other part is what works, like what's the best practice for self-care? And I'd love for people to unmute and share this, because I think that being able to share from each other is so vital, or learn from each other is so vital, because there are things that people did that you're like, oh my gosh, I never thought about that. Mm-hmm. So what are some best practices that you have for self-care?
I know. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I would say for me, hello, y'all, first off, and thank y'all for doing this. For me, I am a second year grad student, so I'm about to enter into the real world. But for me, one thing that I'm learning is like, I have to set my boundaries. Like that is important for my self-care. And like, I work in res life, and oftentimes my RAs will like contact me like after hours, like late at night, and it's like something that is not even like major, that can be an email. And so I have to tell them like, y'all, like I am the only one in this building, like like please respect my boundaries, and like let's talk about, like let's think about like what's an emergency versus like a non-emergency and stuff. And so like establishing that has been helpful for me, but I still have to reiterate that and really stick to it and be like, Mecca, don't look at that email. You will get to it in the morning, or don't look at that text message, you'll get to that in the morning. So like establishing that, because that's helping me to kind of keep that distance and that boundary set.
That's a great. Email is a huge issue. I absolutely agree. Just trying to manage that. And I share this. I don't always do this well, but I try really hard. I'm an early riser. I worked in orientation for years. So getting up and being on campus by 6 or 7 in the morning is not unusual. So that means you get up at 4 or 5. And so I found even in my role now, I'll get up early before my family and I'll answer some emails or something. And I wasn't thinking about it, but I was just sending them. And then people were getting really kind of like, oh my gosh, you're sending emails so early. And I was like, I don't expect you to answer them. Like, I mean, just because I'm sending one. But then I thought I need to think how I do that, because what I'm saying to them is that you're on all the time. And so I try really hard to either save them so the system will send them later, or just do them as drafts and send them when I get to work. But that was a lesson for me too, that I didn't think about that. But Mecca, you're exactly right, where people just assume it's an email, just send it. And then you're really paying attention to it and dealing with something at midnight that you could wait till 10 o'clock tomorrow morning to do.
Yeah, sort of this sort of sense of urgency that we have at higher education, that is false. If somebody's dying, okay, different story. But for the most part, in student affairs, this sense of urgency is not necessary. And I remember I had a supervisor who, which makes total sense. I mean, she would send emails on Sunday, because she had a lot of family obligations, and she had usually about 2 hours on a Sunday to kind of pump out some work. And so we would all get these emails on a Sunday, and folks would freak out because they were like, oh my God. But in her mind, this was just an opportunity. And so I just had a conversation with her and said, I just want to let you know that when you do that, there's anxiety that happens. And she did exactly what you did, Janine. She basically let everyone know. She said, I just want to let everybody know, I understand that there can be anxiety. I don't want you to think that you need to respond. But this is how I'm managing my life. And it was the best conversation we ever had in a staff meeting, because people were like, oh, good. Okay. So we know now that that's what's going on. But if you don't have the conversation initially, you're like, oh my God, we got to respond to all of these things immediately. So absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah. Jess, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I saw Nicole use the word that I've been trying to use more, which is just that grace. I think particularly in a field where we're serving not just other people, but students, like young people, there's always this pressure to give more and support more. And I think that part of the challenge of my self-care practice is to accept and give myself grace when there's nothing left for me to give to a student. You know, working in residence life, my RAs rely pretty heavily on me at times, not just as their supervisor, but just as like a support person. And I've had multiple times this year where I've had to take a step back and say, I've been answering this student for a couple hours on a Saturday, and I don't have anything left to give at this point, and give grace to the fact that like, I am not giving them all that they need right now, but I don't have anything else left to give. And it's a very hard practice, but that grace of like, you can't be everything to everyone all the time. It's something we have to learn, because there's always gonna be more that you could do for a student. There always is. But you have to be able to give back to yourself. I can't say that I've mastered that, but I try to give myself that when I can.
That's Jess, that is so true. And just trying to be able to manage all of that. And when you do have someone else in your life that that is like in the same household, or someone who relies on you, whether it's a parent or a family member that you're helping, or whether it's a partner, or a spouse, or a child, you know, then you go home and you see these eyes. So one of the best things for me is when I go home, my daughter expects that we're going to do stuff. And so, you know, I'm thinking, all right, I may have some email to do, but it can wait till 8 o'clock when she goes to bed, and I can do the stuff I need to do with her, or I'll take her back to a student event or something. And that makes a huge difference to them too. But it's not, it gives me a break. It gives them a break. And then I realized that probably what I needed to do at 8 o'clock really could wait till the next day. So sometimes I might work on something, but not in the same way. So just managing all of those are important, and keeping them in perspective. I used to have a colleague who wanted to go home every day with their email box empty. And I was like, what a great effort. Like, I think I've done it twice in my life. And it's just not like, it's not possible. Or when you get the email from the student at 7, you know, like 7 o'clock in the morning, and they want a response by 8, and you're like, okay, I'm transporting myself and everybody else and trying to get to work. So I'll get you an answer, but it's probably not going to be 8 o'clock in the morning, or someone who sent something between midnight and 2 and they want a response. So really, and the other thing I was going to say, and for those of our colleagues on the call who are in residence life, it's really easy for them to walk up and knock on your door for any student or resident. And so trying to figure out how you manage that. But one of the other things is when you think about your availability to students, and it took me, I don't know, I bet 20 years to figure this out. So if you can do it, I'm going to be impressed. I will be very envious that you've been able to do this earlier. But I also realized that I didn't have to say that I had all the time in the world open. So if a student said, we're going to do our exec meetings at 3 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon, it was okay for me to ask for a different day, because that might be the only day that I had where it wasn't in the office. And that took, like, I felt really bad. I felt like I was letting people down, but just being able to say that, you know, that's the day I do this, or I really need that time to do this. And certainly there's priorities, but you realize that the students could probably meet any day, and they're just picking that day for whatever reason. And so you can ask, can we do it differently? And most of the time they're like, oh, I didn't even think about that. And so I was giving myself permission to say that I don't have to be at everything all the time, or I don't have to be there at the day that is first comes to me, because we might be able to negotiate on that a little bit.
I just want to mention that there's some great suggestions and conversations in the chat. So I want to thank folks for sharing some of the things that they're doing around boundary setting and around what does it look like to have this balance that we're talking about, knowing that it's going to ebb and flow. I mean, there are going to be some times when it's just not going to be, I mean, I love the conversations around housing and residential life, because I do remember my days in housing and residential life, and it was a challenge to sort of balance everything that was happening in the fact that I'm living with students. And what does that look like? So absolutely.
Yeah. And you know, Vernon, I love that too, when you think about residence life, and in my different roles too, over the years, we've been talking about when we're building new residence halls, and it's just simple things like, I will like be adamant till the last breath I have in a conversation to say, you need to put a washer and dryer in the RD's apartment. And then people look at me like I'm crazy. I said, you can't do that. Like, you can't expect that person at a professional level. I said, they're not an undergrad. They may be working on their master's, but most of the time not. I mean, they're managing a lot of things. They got to be able to do that, wash their socks in their own house. Like, you know, don't make them do that with all the students. And some people just don't get it, but I'm like, I just need you to think through that.
Well, I remember when I worked on a campus where my apartment, in my residence hall director apartment, was in the middle of the building. It was it, and you had to know where it was. And I thought, what a brilliant idea to not. It wasn't, my first job. It was in the lobby and connected to the front desk, and so everybody knew where I was. But that my second job when I was an area coordinator, I thought it was interesting that they had the apartments kind of center. So you would have to be a staff member to know where the area director was. And I thought, how cool is that they thought through, giving me some privacy, giving me an opportunity to kind of hide if I needed to, which isn't the case on many campuses.
Mackenzie, I just saw your piece in the chat too. What a great piece to help remind students that you're not their only support system, that it's bigger than you. I think that's phenomenal, because you're right. There's many students who may come to school with not very much of a support system, but there's a lot more people than just you on that campus. That's incredibly helpful, because then I think that helps the students realize too that they can build these systems that can be quite large, and people can help them. So love it. Love the ideas. Thank you so much. The other things to think about are, can you incorporate self-care in the foundation of your work? So what does that look like? What's that look like for you? What does that look like for the people that you supervise? What does that look like for you, for the unit that you're in, for the institution as a whole? And how does, is it more than just saying the words? Like, how do you actually put the talk or the walk behind the talk? How do you make all those things happen? So those are important questions. And then lastly, how can you create a supportive workplace that helps you curtail compassion fatigue and supports compassion satisfaction? And it's that balance, think of the scales of justice of sorts, but think of that piece of how do you balance those? For the most part, how do you balance them every day? And there are going to be things that happen in devastation to your community, which is not something, it's very traumatic to all involved, and it takes a while to rebalance, but you still continue to look at those supportive relationships that are there, or look at the people who are helping you, or whatever that is. I used to have a very good colleague who I'll share the story with you, because it's one of those that you're thinking, oh, I never really thought about it that way until later. But it was a person that I worked with, and I remember we'd had a particularly string of just horrible things that we were talking about, and we were meeting, and it was like a Saturday afternoon, and there was just a need for us to meet because of what had happened, and we're trying to gather all the resources together, and this was before conference calls, so we were all sitting around a table in our office. And at the end of it, there was so much to do. We just had these lists of who we needed to contact and how we needed to put all these support networks for our students together, and for our staff together, and faculty together. And I remember she stood up and she said, I'll be back in a couple hours. I'm going to go and do jazzercise. And I was like, and I was a newer professional. I was like, well, how can you leave? There's so much to do. But that was the best lesson I ever learned, because in the middle of all that, she had everything taken care of. She was able to walk away for a few minutes, take care of herself, and come back. And she was better for it, and we were better for it. But in the moment, people don't always understand that. So trying to figure out, how do you help others understand too, when you have to do that self-care, when it's the best thing to do, and when you need to step away for a minute. So there's so many complex parts to it. But if you don't, we're going to get in this situation where you have, again, that badge of honor for all these things, because I'm giving, but you only have so much to give. And so you have to make sure that you save some to be able to give to the next person, and that you can give to yourself, and you can have all those pieces in some kind of balance. And every day it's a journey, but just kind of keeping through those. So in my mind, if you keep these things and these guiding questions in the back of your mind, you can kind of think through, okay, what's next, and how do I do this? And when you're the person who's the pinpoint, or the center of trying to manage what's happening, you can make sure that you have set up the opportunities for people to take care of themselves too. So, and I'll give you one more example. When I had a particularly terrible situation where a student had died, and we were trying to figure out, okay, what do we do next, and who do we need to get in touch with? And it was early in the morning, and I was on campus with the police and everyone else. And it was 1 o'clock in the morning. I purposely didn't wake anybody else up from my staff until we got to about 8 o'clock the next morning, because there was nothing they could do, first off. And secondly, I knew that they were going to be needed the next day in ways that I knew I couldn't do. And so we just set it together and said, okay, so when I got everybody together and got them on the phone, I said, here's what happened. Here's what we've done so far. This is what we need to do. What are we missing? And we kind of built the plan for the rest of the weekend so that we could help everybody get to Monday. And then we got through Tuesday, and then we got through Wednesday. But it was just stopping to say, everybody can't be up at 1 o'clock in the morning and function at 3 o'clock the next afternoon. And so, you have to think about those things as you're managing this too, and thinking about the fact that people need to sleep, and people need to eat, and people need to, take care of themselves in different ways. And you have to be able to do that sometimes away from what's happening, even if it's 10 or 15 minutes, just walking around the corner and getting a cup of coffee sometimes makes a big difference.
I love that layered approach, because I think sometimes in student affairs, we love to do this all hands on deck kind of thing. And I love that, Janine, that way of saying, okay, if we're going to sustain during this week, how can we move in a way that's more connected, so that way that I can rest while then you take the next step. But we don't typically do that in student affairs. We typically do this whole, everybody's got to be in angst at the same time. And it's like, no. And I love that. I wish, that's, okay, we can just, we can stop right now. I mean, I'm done. This is it. I mean, that was beautiful. It really is. I mean, it does make me really pause to think, okay, so how can I be a better support with staff, faculty, as we move forward in a way that we can help each other in a way. And I think that is a great example of how you assisted in people's self-care with them probably not even knowing it.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, Vernon. And and you think, I don't know about you, but I have these images of what was on the news and how we read in the papers and what was on our phones and the articles that you read around COVID, and you just saw this medical staff just distraught. I mean, they were on all hands on deck all the time, and people were dying, and people were very sick, and people continued to get sick, and nobody knew in the beginning what to do and how to help people. And then we started getting some mitigating strategies, and it got a little better, right? And now we're probably in the best shape we've been in a long time, because we have a lot of mitigating strategies that we can put together. But there's still things happening. There's still people dying. There's still people getting very sick. But you think of those nurses and doctors and first responders and people in the every part of the medical facility, and you think, how do we stop this? Like, how do we stop this? And that gets overwhelming. I can't even imagine. And thank goodness we have these incredible people who are willing to give so much during this pandemic. But I think we just kept thinking, as we turn this corner, okay, it's going to get better. Okay, it's going to get better. And fortunately, in student affairs, we don't have that same kind of thing coming at us in a pandemic that sort of way. But even if you take our role in the pandemic, it was very different, because we're like, okay, how do you set up a testing clinic? Like, where do we even get testing supplies? How do you get people vaccinations? Like, can we do this? Like, what kind of things are my state telling me I have to do? And what's happening in our county? And where do I get this? And it was maddening in a lot of ways.
Well, and I think about too, as you're talking, I'm thinking about, those of us from historically marginalized identities. I think we sometimes feel overly obligated to be present for that identity group. And I really am thinking about the emotional labor that, Black and brown folk, trans folks from historically marginalized identities who have had to navigate these last 3 years. And I had a great supervisor who once told me, Vernon, no matter what you do on a college campus, you will always be director of multicultural affairs. And I said, oh, what do you mean? It goes like, you may be an RD, but you will also be director of multicultural affairs, because the way you present and who you are in your body, you will have another job. And that will be, and sometimes that will really pull you to want to do more. And that's why I think a lot about compassion fatigue, thinking about everything that's happened with the multiple pandemics that have happened over the last 3 years. And Black and brown and trans folks and folks from historically marginalized identities are exhausted. And because they're trying to navigate everything that's happening in the world and on their campus and in their job all at the same time, and really kind of looking at how how identities intersect with this too.
Vernon, you're so right. We didn't even talk about, DEI pieces. I mean, that type of work, you talk about compassion fatigue. I mean, oh my goodness. And it's never ending. It doesn't go away. And it's then layer that upon the other piece and the other piece and the other piece. And you've got people who are just physically exhausted, just physically, emotionally, mentally. Every aspect is exhausting.
Yeah. And then, how can we be of support? I love your conversation around about boundaries, but some of us, and I think many folks have seen, know Brene Brown's work around authenticity, and the fact that she just did a new book with an African-American woman who basically came up to her at a presentation and said, yeah, this is cute that you're talking about authenticity, but as a Black woman, yeah, there's some other dynamics there. And what I love about Brene is she said, you're exactly right. And so she engaged the conversation, and now they have a brand new book out, which I can definitely send I can send the link if those of you haven't seen it, that talks about, that have different writers writing about authenticity from their own perspectives as people of color. And I'm like, oh my God. And so, what a great way to kind of layer it, to say, yes, it can show up differently in the bodies that we're in.
Vernon, I'm just, this has been so, such a positive conversation, and I'm so impressed with people in the chat. And one of the things I absolutely positively love about higher education is we get to have these dialogues. And even though there are times when they may be tilted one way or the other, or maybe not as inclusive as we want them to be, we're having them in ways that most environments are not. So I know when I come to work, I get to talk about this. I get to talk about how we can make it better, how we can include everybody, how everybody can be a part of what we're doing. And I know there are fields and places where you can't, or it's not in the conversation. And so I'm so thankful that, we are making the world a better place. We haven't done it yet. We got a lot of work to do. But I know every day, every conversation that we have, it gets better and better. But that's a lot to carry. But if we all carry it together, it's part of that compassion, satisfaction. It's a satisfying thing to be able to make that, get those connections, get those ideals. But one person can't carry it alone, or they are going to be so fatigued they won't be able to manage. But can we do it together? And if we do it together, we can get further and we can make a bigger difference.
Absolutely. Well, I think you all are noticing we're getting to the top of the hour.
Yeah.
So I do want to, make sure that that these guiding questions will be in the presentation that you can use as you move forward. Janine and I were talking before you all joined us that, we had a participant tell us that they've used these guiding questions to continue the conversations with staff, with their staff and with others who may not have been on this call. Definitely feel free to be a part of that, because we're excited about that. So Janine, any closing thoughts as we sort of wrap up our time?
The only thing I encourage you to do is go and look at those free resources. And particularly if you go to that ProQual website, they have all of a lot more slides than I shared, but there's lots and lots of good information out there. And Charles Figley has all kinds of work that he's done that is, again, out there. Most of it is free. He does have some good books if you want to read them, but most of it you can find online because people have quoted and done so much. But it's just a great conversation to stop and just make sure you're taking care of yourself, and that you're then able to take care of others. So I wish you the best. I'm so excited that you were a part of the conversation today and part of this presentation. And if there's anything I can do for you, please let me know. I'm happy to have a conversation on the phone, email, Zoom, whatever works for you.
Great. Thanks, Janine. And just a reminder for folks, I know there are a couple of questions around the slides. Yes, this presentation was recorded. And so you all will get a link that has all of this information also too. And then of course, Janine is available if you want to connect with her, of course. So thank you, Janine. What an amazing conversation. This has been great. Very helpful for me. I hope it's been helpful for you all. Janine is just a bright and shining star in the world, and I'm just so excited to be in the world with her. So it wouldn't be, an opportunity, we would not press up the opportunity to basically talk a little bit about LeaderShape, and know that for those of you who do not know us, we do have programs that we're offering now, both virtually and in person. As you can imagine, our in-person programs have ramped up now, and folks are wanting us to come to campus. Happy to engage with you all if you feel that we can be of support in your leadership development programs. But Catalyst, Resilience, our Institute, and Courageous Dialogue are all sort of jumping now. So we're excited to partner with you if we can be of help. And also too, we are not for profit, and we would love if you feel the need and have the resources to support us. Feel free to do that. And thank you. Thank you again, Janine. We'll be back again tomorrow with another conversation, which I was going to have it right here in front of me so I could remember, but I forgot now. Tomorrow we have, oh yeah, Brent. Oh, and I think Brent's on. Brent Turner's going to be joining us tomorrow to talk about exploring our persistence amidst the Great Resignation reevaluation. We wanted to make sure that what a great sort of 1-2 punch, I think, with Janine and then Brent to really talk about, so what does this mean and how does this look? I think we can build on this conversation. So thanks everyone, and have a great day. And yeah, let us know if you need, if we can be of assistance to you. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.